The tank destroyer was burning. Flames crawled along the shattered steel hull, rising from the engine compartment and slowly spreading toward the stacks of ammunition stored inside the vehicle. Thick black smoke twisted into the gray winter sky, while the smell of gasoline and burning metal filled the frozen air of eastern France. Inside that wrecked M10 tank destroyer were hundreds of rounds of .50 caliber ammunition and explosive shells slowly heating in the fire. The crew who once operated the vehicle were already dead. The machine had become a coffin wrapped in flames. And through the smoke of the battlefield, one American officer began climbing onto it. Behind him, 19 exhausted soldiers were retreating toward the dark tree line of the Colmar Woods. They were not cowards. They were the last survivors of Company B. Only hours earlier, the company had started the day with more than 100 soldiers holding a thin defensive line outside the small French village of Holzwehr. But the morning had brought a storm of German artillery that shattered their trenches and ripped apart their positions. Mortars followed. Machine guns followed. The battlefield turned into a storm of exploding earth and flying steel. When the shelling stopped, the German infantry began advancing across the open snow-covered fields, and behind them came the heavy tanks. 250 German infantry. 6 armored vehicles. Against 19 tired Americans. The mathematics of survival said retreat. Every military manual written about combat said the same thing in a situation like this. Withdraw. Regroup. Live to fight another day. Even the officers who outranked him had already pulled their units back to safer positions deeper in the woods. But Second Lieutenant Audie Murphy was not following the manual. At just 5 feet 5 inches tall and barely 130 pounds, Murphy looked more like a high school student than a combat officer. In fact, when he tried to enlist at the beginning of the war, nearly every branch of the military had rejected him. The Marines rejected him for being too small. The paratroopers rejected him for being underweight. Recruiters took one look at the skinny teenager from rural Texas and assumed he would never survive the brutal reality of frontline combat. But the recruiters did not understand the life Murphy had already survived. He was born into crushing poverty in rural Texas. His father abandoned the family when he was still a child, leaving his mother alone to raise 12 children. When she died, the responsibility for feeding and protecting his younger siblings fell onto Murphy's shoulders, even though he was barely a teenager himself. School ended early for him. Childhood ended even earlier. Survival became the only thing that mattered. When World War II arrived, the Army seemed like the only path forward. But there was one problem. Murphy was too young to enlist. He was only 17 years old. So he lied about his age, using falsified documents and the help of his sister to join the United States Army in 1942. No one expected the quiet young soldier to become anything extraordinary. Many officers assumed he would simply disappear among the thousands of recruits being sent into the chaos of war. Instead, he quickly proved something about himself that statistics and appearances could never measure. He refused to quit. Murphy fought through the Allied invasion of Sicily. He fought in the brutal campaign across Italy. Later, he fought through southern France after the Allied landings in 1944. Again and again, he displayed an almost unbelievable calm under enemy fire. When machine guns pinned units to the ground, Murphy crawled toward them. When soldiers were wounded in open fields, Murphy ran through bullets to pull them back to safety. Time after time, he risked his own life to protect the men around him. By the winter of 1945, he had already earned multiple medals for bravery. Yet nothing he had done before will compare to what happened on January 26th near the village of Holzwehr. The German attack had begun before sunrise. Snow covered the battlefield like a silent white blanket, broken only by explosions and the thunder of artillery. German gunners pounded American positions for hours before sending infantry forward to exploit the destruction. It was a textbook assault designed to break weakened defenses and open a path for armored units. And it worked. By midday, Company B had been nearly destroyed. Bodies lay scattered across the snow. Weapons burned in craters left by artillery shells. Survivors struggled to hold a defensive line that was collapsing minute by minute. Then the German tanks appeared through the drifting snow. Dark armored shapes moving slowly across the open field like predators closing in on wounded prey. Their engines roared as they advanced toward the shattered American positions. Murphy immediately understood what it meant. If the tanks reached the tree line, the 19 soldiers behind him would be trapped and destroyed. The M10 tank destroyer assigned to support his unit had already taken a direct hit from a German 88mm shell. The explosion ripped through the hull, killing 2 crew members instantly. The third crawled from the wreckage with his uniform on fire before collapsing into the snow. Murphy ran through the battlefield and dragged the wounded soldier to safety. Then he looked back at the burning vehicle. And he noticed something. The heavy .50 caliber machine gun mounted on the turret was still intact. The weapon had enormous range and devastating power. If someone used it, it could slow the German infantry long enough for Murphy's men to escape into the woods. But climbing onto that vehicle meant standing on top of burning gasoline and ammunition that could explode at any moment. Murphy turned to his soldiers and gave a simple order. Fall back. The men stared at him in disbelief. Their sergeant tried to argue, but Murphy repeated the command with calm authority. One by one, the soldiers retreated toward the trees, glancing back at the impossible sight of their lieutenant climbing onto a burning tank destroyer. Moments later, the 1st German Infantry appeared in Murphy's sights. They were veterans of brutal fighting on the Eastern Front, men who had survived years of combat against Soviet armies. They advanced across the snow with the confidence of soldiers who expected the remaining American resistance to collapse within minutes. They did not expect one man standing on a burning vehicle. Murphy squeezed the trigger. The .50 caliber machine gun roared across the frozen battlefield. Heavy rounds slammed into the snow and tore through the advancing German soldiers. The first burst cut down several men instantly and forced the rest to dive for cover. Within seconds, every German weapon on the battlefield turned toward Murphy's position. Rifle shots cracked past his head. Machine gun tracers streaked through the gray winter air. Bullets hammered against the metal hull beneath his feet. Murphy stood exposed from the waist up, silhouetted against the flames rising behind him. And he kept firing. If you're enjoying this real World War II story so far, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to the channel WW2 Forgotten Paths. These forgotten stories of courage deserve to be remembered, and your support helps bring them to more people around the world. The first German tank fired. The shell screamed through the air and exploded behind Murphy in the trees where his men had taken cover. Frozen dirt and splinters of wood rained down across the battlefield. Murphy did not move. He kept firing. The second shell landed closer, showering him with fragments of ice and metal. A piece of shrapnel tore into his leg, sending blood running down his boot. Murphy ignored the pain. The Germans began trying to flank him, spreading across both sides of the burning tank destroyer. Murphy swung the machine gun in wide arcs, sweeping the battlefield with continuous fire and forcing the attackers to stay pinned down. But even he knew the truth. One machine gun could not stop tanks forever. Murphy grabbed the radio mounted on the vehicle and called for artillery support. Miles behind the lines, an American artillery observer answered the transmission. Murphy calmly gave him the coordinates for a fire mission. The observer paused, then asked Murphy to confirm the location, because the coordinates pointed directly to the burning tank destroyer. Murphy's own position. Murphy replied calmly, "I know exactly where I am. Fire the mission." Moments later, artillery shells began falling from the sky. Explosions tore across the open field only yards away from Murphy's position. German infantry scattered in panic as the bombardment ripped through their formation. Still, the tanks continued forward. Murphy kept firing, minute after minute. The barrel of the machine gun grew so hot it began glowing from constant use. Flames climbed higher behind him, creeping closer to the ammunition inside the hull. Yet Murphy refused to leave. The battle continued for nearly an hour. By the end of that hour, more than 50 German soldiers had been killed by Murphy's machine gun and the artillery strikes he directed. The survivors began retreating across the field they had crossed with such confidence earlier that morning. Without infantry support, the German tanks were forced to withdraw as well. The counterattack had failed. Only then did Murphy finally jump from the tank destroyer. Seconds later, the heat from the fire ignited the ammunition stored inside the hull. The vehicle exploded violently as shells detonated one after another. Murphy had escaped the blast by less than half a minute. Despite his wounded leg and burned hands, he limped back to the tree line where his soldiers were waiting. Instead of continuing the retreat, Murphy reorganized his 19 exhausted men and led them in a counterattack. The Germans, shaken by the hour they had spent trying to kill one man standing on a burning tank destroyer, broke and ran when the Americans emerged from the woods. Later, when the battle reports were written, even experienced commanders struggled to believe the numbers. One man had stopped an entire counterattack. More than 50 enemy soldiers killed. 6 tanks forced to retreat. A shattered American line saved from collapse. For his actions that day, Audie Murphy received the Medal of Honor and became the most decorated American soldier of World War II. If this story of impossible courage inspired you, make sure you like this video, subscribe to WW2 Forgotten Paths, and share it with someone who loves real history. And before you leave, answer one question in the comments. If you were in that frozen field, would you have climbed onto the burning tank like Audie Murphy, or would you have retreated with the rest of the soldiers?